So heating up, like stir frying something on the skillet is a prime example of how not to cook vegetables and it's a loaded question, right? Because on the one hand, you have to cook vegetables to some extent to relieve the anti-nutrient load, because vegetables don't have claws. The only way they fight back are these things called anti-nutrients. Beans are a prime example because they have a high load of phytic acid, and phytic acid is a binder, and it binds to minerals. So if you don't cook your beans correctly, especially kidney beans, not only will it make you sick, but then it also will bind to minerals in your body and pull them out. Now, the flip side to that is if you cook it too much, well, then you lose a lot, if not most, of the nutritional value.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 8 of the Status Joe podcast. I really appreciate everybody tuning in. My guest this week is Adam Chauncey. Adam is a nutritionist. He works at Nutrition World, which is one of the largest nutrition supplement providers in the southeastern U.S. We had an awesome conversation today about what Adam does on a day-to-day basis, and he has a really interesting approach to nutrition, starting really with looking at people's blood work, examining the inflammation in their body, and then building up their diet and exercise routine based off of all of that information. We kind of hit on everything from different types of diets, benefits of carnivore versus plant-based versus keto, where you should be sourcing your food from, how you should be cooking food, especially like vegetables, and how the different ways you cook the vegetable changes the nutritional value, what type of exercises you should be doing, etc. So all in all, super interesting guy. Definitely enjoyed talking to him, and think he has a great approach to a great holistic approach to nutrition and diet. He actually calls it just how you can change your lifestyle. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and appreciate everybody joining in.
All right, man, we can just go ahead and dive on in. Adam, I again appreciate you coming on. I'm really excited to talk to you about nutrition, and I thought a good place to start would maybe just for you to chat a little bit about when you have a client come in, kind of what's your process with somebody. I mean, I'm sure they give you maybe a list of goals they have, and maybe you do some evaluations from there. What are you kind of looking to do when somebody first comes in?
Yeah, man. So normally, it's tough because they're all different. And with our store, I'm not your typical clinical setting. As a nutritionist, I have, what's the word? We have probably 300 people a day come in our storefront. We're a 3,000 square foot nutritional center with 3 different buildings encompassing pretty much a city block. So we get a lot of folks in. I go from anywhere from just meeting with somebody on the floor for 5 to 10 minutes. And sometimes that spurs me into actually getting them scheduled for a consult. And then we go from there. And then I got some folks that actually their practitioners send them in as far as they need a nutritionist that doesn't exactly follow the, food pyramid. And depending on their background, depending on what brings them in, depending on how we got them, started, we start out with, typical waivers, stuff like that, medical information, all that kind of stuff, background information. And then I do like to assess their goals. I like to see, I like to get about a 2-week head start. So I see them for an initial consultation. I'll get a ton of information. I'll make a few minute recommendations. And then I'll log their food, I'll log their activities, I'll log their exercise, I'll log their mood, I'll log their, as fun as this is, bowel movements, stuff like that for 2 weeks. And then when they come in for their follow-up, that's when
you say log that, are they keeping, like, you give them like a sheet or something that they're kind of keeping track of all that in, and then after 2 weeks they come in?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and those are my most, dedicated folks. A lot of folks aren't looking for that. A lot of folks won't do that. Some folks, the most I can get out of them is 2 weeks of dietary logging, and that's fine.
Right.
I'll take what I can get.
Do you see, like, if there's one goal that kind of sticks out, is there something that most people are looking to do? Is it typically losing weight that you're dealing with?
Yeah, really with us, because we're a little bit different setup, because a lot of people come to us as a last resort because they've gone to the doctor, they've gone to a dietitian, they've gone to, you name it, Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and whatever else. They come to us and they're, like, man, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I either can't lose weight, I can't gain muscle, I feel like crap, I have an autoimmune condition, whatever the case may be. And then I center everything around the diet, of course, and just nutrition in general, nutraceuticals and whatnot. And so that's probably the main thing is weight loss, but it's never quite so simple, because normally if it was just weight loss, their doctor would just tell them to eat less, and they drop weight for about 2 to 3 months and then gain it all back. I get some of those, but most of the ones I get are people that they've actually tried to follow like a legitimate plan. They've gone to a personal trainer, they've gone to at least what they think is a legitimate dietitian or nutritionist.
What's the failure point of most of those people?
Most of them, it's tough to say. I guess I'd have to say maybe 3 to 6 months time wise, and typically they rebound.
Yeah. So maybe I should be more clear. Like, is there something that you typically see where this is where you've gone wrong in those 3 to 6 months and you're gaining all the weight back? Or does it kind of run the gambit? Or is that what you're trying to get to the bottom of? Like, is that your real job, is to kind of figure
Yeah,
out?
so typically it's me trying to get to the bottom of it, because most, in my experience, most clinical nutritionists, dietitians, and then practitioners do not have the wherewithal to follow or to track very well. They'll go through the basic stuff, I call it, the gold standard of education. So extremely old data, extremely old thought processing with what's making them lose weight, just trying to get them, eat less calories. And that's about the extent of it, and, more vegetables. So that works for about this many people.
Right.
And that tends to be the failure point. It's they do that for a couple of months, and anybody can stick with almost anything for a couple of months, and then they hit a wall. And most nutritionists, dietitians, personal trainers, they don't know how to get the client past that plateau. And that's where it becomes much more personalized. You really have to dig into, what makes the client tick. You have to work with a practitioner. You have to get blood work. You have to go through nutraceuticals. You have to really get down to the bare bones.
Yeah. What are you looking for in the blood work that's enlightening to what the issue might be, that like a doctor wouldn't have necessarily looked at? Or is a doctor ever really looking at blood work in terms of weight loss?
Doctors, so that's a fun topic. Typically, I look for the metabolic markers. So, and not just like a typical metabolic panel. We have a nurse on staff, and we work with multiple local practitioners. So I get the benefit of seeing a lot of blood work. And what I see when I'm working with these docs is it's typically, they have the basic gambit of work done. And then I'll say, well, have you considered running an insulin panel? Have you considered running a high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is a marker of chronic inflammation? Have you considered, different, what's another good one? A full thyroid panel instead of just a typical thyroid stimulating hormone, which is their thyroid panel. When you start running all these other numbers, then you might start to see a correlation. You might start to see and a lot of times I have the doctor say, oh yeah, I didn't notice that. And once they see that, we can say, okay, well, you've got the cards stacked against you. Your thyroid's kaput, it's not working anymore. You have Hashimoto's, you have some kind of disease. And, we don't give out as far as treating medical issues or anything like that, but we can at least see it and then notify the practitioner like, hey, this is something might be going on. I've got them on some vitamin D. You might want to talk to them about, I don't know, a different medication or getting them off of some of this medication. And so that blood work, it's like changing oil in a car. I mean, most people get blood work done once a year, and it's a panel that's tiny, but you get your oil changed every 3 months. You know,
Right.
you really need to know what's going on inside the body. And most practitioners don't test for it. Most practitioners get you for 7 minutes and then you're out the door with insurance anyway.
Right.
You know, so they don't have the time or the patience, you know, to go deep into it. So we try to bridge that gap as far as, you know, basic dietetics and nutrition, and then also linking it with actual daily habits, blood chemistry, disease states and stuff like that. But to round that out, the main thing I look for is metabolic disease risk factors, which are things like insulin, blood sugar, inflammation markers, autoimmune conditions, things like that.
Yeah. So you just mentioned inflammation. Can you maybe hit on a little bit, maybe two things, like why inflammation is so bad, maybe what it is, why it's so bad, and then kind of like your protocol for dealing with that chronic inflammation?
Yeah, well, inflammation is kind of the root. Well, it's a two-faced coin, I guess. You could consider insulin, hyperinsulinemia, or being insulin resistant is the term most people are more familiar with. So chronically high insulin levels. You could consider that the main metabolic disease factor. So with chronically high insulin, and just take it a step back, you know, when your blood sugar is constantly elevated from processed carbohydrates and sugar, things like that,
Right.
or from chronic stress with cortisol, your blood sugar becomes chronically elevated, and thus insulin becomes chronically elevated because
Is insulin what's processing those sugars and the cortisols?
Yeah,
So your body is releasing that, right?
Yeah, so the body releases insulin in regards to circulating blood sugar levels. And if the blood sugar is chronically high, you're constantly releasing insulin to help load that sugar into the cell to get it out of the bloodstream, because sugar in the bloodstream and chronic levels can be inflammatory and dangerous, right?
Right.
So, and typically cortisol is the offsetting factor on the other side there, right?
Okay.
But when one's high for a very long time, the other one starts to creep up, and that's due to inflammation and just a standard body process. So when we see that on blood work, or we see that in labs come back from the practitioner, well, at least I try my best to start from the ground up. So we say, okay, what are you doing that you're not telling your doctor? What are you doing that you're not telling your current dietitian or whatever? When it's usually, you know, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm eating this, I'm eating that, I'm exercising. You know, it gets down to like, are you sleeping? Yeah, I sleep 6 hours a night. Like, that's not enough, you know? So there's a marker of inflammation. I have a really stressful job that I hate. There's another marker of inflammation. And then you also get to where it's like, well, I only eat organic bread. It's like, okay, well, that bread is still processed. I don't care if it's organic. You know, yes, you're not getting as much contamination, but it's probably still not good, right? So we start crossing all these T's, dotting all these I's to try to get the root cause of inflammation, if we can, you know, tease it out, to reduce these existential factors. And then if we still have something going on that's causing inflammation, you know, after 2 to 3 months and get more blood work done, well, then we start looking at actual chronic conditions like Hashimoto's, for instance, or irritable bowel syndrome, or, you know, you name it, lupus, what else? Epstein-Barr virus, or the monovirus.
Yeah.
Things like that, which we end up seeing a lot of, because once again, they've gone through all these other practitioners and whatnot and not seen results. So they get to us and we start, you know, we do a $500 stool test. Then we find out that, oh, you've got mold toxicity. Like you must have a high mold load in your home. When did you buy your home? How old is it? You know, have you ever had a flood? This, that, and the other.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So
And then,
it's a holistic kind of approach to looking at what's going on in somebody.
yeah, it's different. You know, I wish I had a picture of it. I do it in my office, but we have the functional medicine tree and the roots.
What's it called?
The functional medicine tree.
Functional medicine tree. Okay.
Yeah. So the roots of that tree are gut toxicity, you know, absorption issues, right? So everything kind of starts in the gut. So the majority of your immune system resides. You've got I want to say it's 1 millimeter. It's the thickness of a dime. So about 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter thick wall between the gut layer and your vascular system. So
when people say the gut, is that referring specifically to your stomach, or does that include like your small and large intestine? Like what exactly is the gut? Because I hear this talked about a lot.
yeah, when I talk about gut, I'm primarily talking about the small, large intestine.
Okay.
I try to tease the two out because they can be because they're very different, right? The stomach's very different from the small intestine. The small intestine is very different from the large intestine, and sections of the small intestine are very different, right? So, but your gut wall rests like this against your vascular system, and what happens if you look at a top-down view, it starts to spread like this when you get more and more inflammation from the diet, from stress, from
This is a leaky gut.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So once you start to get that leaky gut, then you get a ton of inflammatory markers. You get a ton of gastrointestinal distress. You can't poop, or you poop too much.
Is that because there are whatever's contained in your gut is not supposed to be leaking out into your bloodstream and the other parts of your body?
Yeah.
So it's inflaming everything.
Yeah.
Like
think of
your
your
body
gut
trying
like a
to
house.
do
Yeah.
what?
Think of your gut like a house, like a plumbing system. I mean, you don't want water spraying out everywhere, right? It's going to rot the wall. It's going to create mold. It's going to create, house inflammation, right? Like mold.
Right.
So it's the same principle with your body. Our bodies are miraculous healers. Like they can do a whole lot to repair themselves. But I mean, you get, especially our generation, the last 30 or so years, now that we've got like such modified food, like our bodies don't know how to tolerate it, and they can't really repair or guard against it. So you get more and more of that gastric inflammation to the point to where now, folks under the age of 40 have 30% more autoimmune conditions, than the generation before them. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And it's pretty much all rooted in the gut with this inflammatory response.
Mm-hmm. So you were mentioning earlier, like processed foods. One, maybe could you explain what someone like you means when you talk about a processed food?
Yeah. So if it has to be, I don't go quite so drastic as the typical like paleo diet might suggest. So it's got to have like, 5 or 6 ingredients, and it has to have natural binding and no treatment of any sort. I can get behind things like, what's a good example? Ezekiel bread, for instance. It's a flourless sprouted grain bread that has to be cooked, right? Okay, so that's technically processing, but it's cooked, but it's without flour. So it's there's a lot less contamination likely there. I even have some people that are fairly gluten sensitive that can tolerate that over a flour-based bread. Both organic, both quickly perishable, but one has flour, one doesn't. The flour tends to make the difference. So there's one example of a somewhat processed food technically, but it's still not that complex. A super simple food, for instance, is something like you name it. Anything you can pick up off the ground or out of a tree is pretty much processed. Or some stuff that really doesn't get a lot of light shown on, and this is one of the things that sets me apart, at least in our area. I think I'm the only nutritionist that does this, but animal-based diets. Animal-based diets are extremely low process because you cut it, kill the animal, cut it out, and lightly heat it, or heat it low and slow, and that's it.
Right.
So with a lot of other options, especially vegetables, especially certain types of vegetables, the cooking process is so important that it can be the difference in making you sick or making you well, just in the cooking process.
Is that in the terms of like what's biologically or chemically going on from the different ways that you cook the food? Because like foods, when you cook them right, they have different nutritional values than when they're raw, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying like animal-based, like if you were to kill a deer or something and cut the hindquarters out and just cook that over a cast iron skillet really slow, that's probably a good bet that nothing is going on from a chemical standpoint that's going to change, that's going to be detrimental to your body. But vegetables are different. Like, what would be a bad way you could cook a vegetable? Or like, give me an example of like a vegetable that, hey, if you cook it like this, it might be better than if you cook it like that.
Yeah. So superheating, so heating up, like stir frying something on the skillet is a prime example of how not to cook vegetables, because And it's a loaded question, right? Because on the one hand, you have to cook vegetables to some extent to relieve the anti-nutrient load, because vegetables don't have claws. The only way they fight back are these things called anti-nutrients. Beans are a prime example because they have a high load of phytic acid, and phytic acid is a binder, and it binds to minerals. So if you don't cook your beans correctly, especially kidney beans, not only will it make you sick, but then it also will bind to minerals in your body and pull them out. Now, the flip side to that is if you cook it too much, well, then you lose a lot, if not most, of the nutritional value. A lot of those phytonutrients, which I don't really like the term phytonutrient, because your body doesn't have to have anything that's necessarily not in animal sourced food that is in plant-based food, right? So it's just different types of the same nutrients. And typically, like animals like ruminants, for instance, like cattle, will upcycle those nutrients. So you get a lot less of the toxic load, a lot more of the beneficial load. So going back to cooking, I steam anytime I eat vegetables, which isn't often, but anytime I eat vegetables, I usually get them lightly steamed. And I'm very particular. I don't like them coated with anything. I'll always dress my vegetables after they're cooked with any kind of oil, like an olive oil or a butter or something like that.
Yeah. So you're good with butter and olive oil then?
100%. Yeah.
What is your, I mean, I know everybody's different, but like, what is your typical kind of diet like? What do you recommend? Like, there's all this stuff out, right? There's carnivore, there's keto, there's paleo, there's vegan. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe take me through some of the highs and lows of each of those. I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
And I feel like the answer might be it's different for everybody, but you know, do your best.
Yeah, I'll spare you the standard. It's different for everybody, because I think everybody knows that, right? It is different for everybody, sure. But one of the things I have a lot of success with my clients with, on multiple levels. One, actually probably the most, being just ease of stick with itness, right? Like ease of use, ease of application, and that's an animal-based diet or a carnivore-based diet. Dr. Paul Saladino makes a really good case for this. He's on social media as Carnivore MD, and Saladino's work is fantastic. He really breaks down the science good, and he's not dogmatic with anything. He's not like going out to fight people, right, about his system. He just presents it, and you do what you want with it, right? So I'm a big fan of taking very clean, grass-finished, organic ruminant meats and making that, and wild-caught fish. So ruminant meats and wild-caught fish.
What are ruminant meats?
So any type of animal that rummages, breaks dirt on the ground, like cattle, bison, different types of wild game. I think you wouldn't really consider deer in that, but I would throw deer in, yak, different type of lamb, to some extent wild pork, like boar,
Hogs. Yeah.
right? But you got to be really careful with hogs and pigs in general. Just porcine sourced anything is pretty tough, at least in this country.
Yeah.
So most of that, as far as land-based game, and then water-based game, anything pretty much that comes out of the Norwegian Sea or the Arctic Ocean, salmon, king salmon, any of the different types of salmons, cod, halibut. What else? If you can get it, wild-caught trout, but it's got to be like nowhere from around here because it's extremely toxic.
Where are you getting like, aside from the fish, where are you getting like your meats? Those, like you were talking about, cattle and bison and lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I feel like they've got to be grass-fed, more open range. Like, do you have websites that you use or companies that you think do a pretty good job of sourcing those meats?
Yeah. So number one, I always recommend finding a local farmer. And there's a couple reasons for that. My in-laws just started a huge ranch down in Fairmount, Georgia, outside of Calhoun, and we raise Angus cattle, grass finished or grain finished, whatever people want, because you do have the option there. We do that. So I'm always, and even before we had a stake in the game, I was a big fan of local farm raised animals or wild animals. We've got at our store at Nutrition World, we have fish sourced all the way from Alaska. It's flown in by a bush pilot We have that. We have multiple other local meat options. So I always recommend shopping local. Now, outside of that, you have these companies like White Oak Pastures out of Georgia. They're fantastic. Butcher Box is fantastic. That's where most of my meat comes from.
Yeah, I
And
used to do Butcher Box.
yeah,
They're
and
good stuff.
or you can just go to Publix. I go to Publix 2 to 3 times a week probably, just to grab little odds and ends things. And if I'm running low on meat, I'll grab some meat there. They usually have a great selection. Funny enough, when the pandemic was really roaring and you couldn't find food anywhere, I would go to Publix and get whatever I wanted because no one would buy the grass-fed stuff, which is absolutely ridiculous to me. But I didn't miss a meal. I didn't worry about running out of food because I would just walk over to that section. And the 2 sections in the store that were always full was the vegan meat section, and then the organic grass-fed meat section.
Right.
So,
do you ever eat, or what are your thoughts on organ meats? So like heart and liver and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I've actually got a blend, a 70-30 blend in the freezer right now of muscle meat to organ meat ratio. When you do it like that, I absolutely love it. I am not one of these zealots that can say I can eat raw liver. I am not that type of person.
Yeah.
I do love the modality. Like, I love using it as a therapeutic. I love using it as a way to get, like, I had a lady that had been suffering from Epstein-Barr since the late 80s and had never really known that that was the issue until we did a huge panel on her. And of course, her practitioner was like, yeah, she's got this antibody in her blood, but we're not really sure if it's flared up or whatever. So we did some more tests. Come to find out, not only did she have mold toxicity, but she also was still like circulating ups and downs of Epstein-Barr activity. So I stripped it down. I put her on a strict carnivore diet. That's my version of a autoimmune protocol, not a like an AIP diet. I go the opposite. I don't do the plant-based. I do the meat-based typically. And had her doing broth every day with organ meats. And within
like a bone marrow broth, or
like a bone marrow broth or whatever she could get her hands on. She was pretty handy with making her own, so she got the good stuff. But some people, I mean, they can buy the prepackaged stuff in the store. It's better than nothing.
What's the purpose of, just maybe before we dive any deeper, like what's the theory behind the elimination diet? Is it just eliminating everything that could be like causing this Epstein-Barr virus in this case to activate, right? Because that's like mono, right? And that stays within you forever and can like chronically activate and deactivate, right?
Right. You always have immune, like that's what's so cool about our adaptive immune system. You always have antibodies for it once you get it. It's one reason why this whole recent pandemic thing was quite overblown. But once you get something, you're typically going to be resistant to it. That's the main way most viruses work, which is what Epstein-Barr is. The downside to some of these viruses, and mono is one, is for some people, it can chronically reoccur. So it can flare back up in the system. Your body might be in some weakened state, can't fight it off, or your immune system just weakens, and then you get a flare up. Kind of like with chicken pox and name's escaping me. I need to finish my caffeine for the morning. Chicken pox and the downstream nerve condition. I don't know why I can't think of
Shingles.
Shingles, thank you. Yes, shingles. Good Lord. Yeah, so shingles. So typically you get that flare up a few years later, right? It's the same virus, just in a different form. Well, when that happens with something like Epstein-Barr, it's really damaging. It sucks. And if you don't know what to look for with that, you just have the symptoms of chronic fatigue, stress, sleeplessness, you name it, right? So it's not treated well. Well, when you go to something like an autoimmune protocol, you're essentially declawing the autoimmune condition, right? Because it's just your immune system trying to fight itself to get that out of the bloodstream. So you're declawing your own immune system without destroying it. Like, say, an autoimmune protocol versus a antibiotic, for instance. An autoimmune protocol is just helping the body reduce its own inflammatory process. The antibiotic, rather, is going to literally destroy bacteria. No holds barred, right? which can then wreck the immune system fully. So I like the autoimmune protocol with organ meats, with animal meats, because most animal meats, whether it be grass finished or not, or wild caught or not, typically has less capability to damage the system or to flare the immune system further. Most people that are in a sensitive state like she was has some kind of gut condition. She had quite the gut condition.
Right.
She could not tolerate lentils. She could not tolerate legumes. She could not tolerate, what else could that woman eat? She couldn't eat obviously anything with sugar or anything else in it, right? She could barely eat fruit, so it was pretty easy for me to say, okay, let's just strip it down to meat. Let's strip it down to bone broth and see how you do. And within 4 weeks, we had her back to eating somewhat normal stuff. And within 3 months, she was back to a completely normal diet. She had almost no symptoms. And,
Is that just because, like, why was she able to go back? Like, why could she go back from the elimination diet to a normal diet? Was it just that her body had corrected?
Yeah, it's a course correction. Like, remember the gut wall when it kind of spreads out? Well, when you can tighten it back up, those tight junctions are what they're called, that have to seal back up to block things out. You can pretty much go back so long as you're not, poking the bear. You don't want to go back to eating M&Ms and Skittles. You want to eat good.
You had to go back to a diet that was more plentiful, we'll say, had more options in it, but it's still not going to open the walls of that gut back up like you were originally doing.
Exactly. Like, I'll give myself as an example. I'm not gluten sensitive. Well, I'm not gluten intolerant. I'm not celiac, nothing like that. I'm not even allergic to it. But I'm having to clear my throat quite a bit this morning because, as I was telling you before we started, I had a birthday party last night and I ate some cake and what else did we have? Barbecue and with bread and whatnot. So all that being said, so I ate way out of my normal range and I get congestion associated with it, just a natural immune response for people that are somewhat sensitive to gluten and things, to increase mucosal production to protect the gut lining from top to bottom. And, I don't, in the house, I absolutely love bread. I'm one of those guys that back in the day, I'd go to Logan's Roadhouse and destroy some rolls. You know what I mean?
Right.
And nowadays, the only bread I keep in the house is flourless bread. And, I might eat some of that a couple times a week after a hard workout. I don't really use that as a meal, as a part of a meal. Most of the time I try to avoid it totally. But if I'm going to have it, it's going to have as little of aggravating constituents in it as possible. So if it's bread, it's flourless and it's organic. It's the cleanest of the clean. And it's still not something that I regularly keep in there. And that's what I told her. You have to be willing not to go back to that. You have to be willing to make these sacrifices. You have to be willing to eat to live, not live to eat. And once you cross that, and really once people that come to us, because we have so many cases like this, they start to feel better and they haven't felt good in 10 years, 20 years. It's easy. They're not going to go back to eating pizza and drinking crappy wine from Walmart. They're going to actually, switch it up and enjoy life. It's harder for people that are just coming in off the street wanting a quick fix that haven't dealt with something like that. But your long haulers, they are very, very easily swayed most of the time.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on, I know you talk highly about carnivore. What are your thoughts on veganism, on strictly vegetable? Or I guess it's not totally the case, but yeah. I guess is veganism strictly vegetables? I can't even keep track of all the
So veganism is not only strictly vegetables, but if you're actually doing it like fully, veganism is no harm to animals in any sort of way.
Yeah.
Which in that case, there's no such thing, because veganism actually has one of the worst impacts on the environment, including animals, of anything, more so than regenerative farming, right? So that's a little catch-22 I like to throw at folks when they talk about veganism and wanting it because one of the first things I always ask is, why are you a vegan if I'm working with a vegan? Is it because of animal rights cruelty? Is it because of religious things like Seventh-day Adventists, for instance? Right. And if it's religious stuff, I'm like, cool. all right, you know, that's not something I'm going to fight with. I might try to convince a little bit of fudging here and there, but I'll leave that alone because I can respect that. When it comes to the other, when we're talking about environmental impact or animal cruelty impact and all that, then I have to really take into task. And I do it kindly. I'm not, once again, I'm not one of these dogmatic jerks that is like, you have to eat meat always, you know, whatever. No, I can utilize, and I have utilized plant-based diets for people many times, but it's not the way the system's set up. You know, there's a reason why a monkey can eat grass and leaves constantly and chew on sticks, and they do eat constantly. You know, if you want to consider that our ancestors, that's what they eat constantly.
They do eat all
also
day.
Have like a 36-foot colon, you know, so they can ferment it and digest it a whole lot better than we can, right? And they don't have canine teeth. So, you know, that's just one sample I can draw, but when it comes to nutritional density, there's no comparison. I mean, you have to eat the equivalent of roughly 10 oranges to get the same amount of nutrition in one orange from, you know, 80 years ago. You have to do the same thing with broccoli. I mean, to get most of the gluconeosinolates and glucoraphanins from cruciferous vegetation, you have to eat like 10 freaking cups a day, and then you have to prepare it.
Why is that? Have we just grown all the nutrition out of the plants?
Yeah. So I don't know how tall you are, Joe. I'm just an inch or so under 6 foot.
Yeah, I'm like 5'7".
Okay. So you could have buried both of us, you know, under the topsoil about 100 years ago. Topsoil used to be on the average of the U.S., it was about 6 or so foot deep. Okay. Now the average is roughly 6 inches, and actually quite a bit less in many areas, right?
Can you be a little more clear when you're talking about topsoil?
Yes. So just the soil, when you break the ground, when you stick a shovel in the ground, you usually see, if you're in the country anyway, you'll see a rich, dark, mineral dense soil. You dig past that, a lot of times you run into clay or you run into rock, things like that. It used to be that you had to just keep digging and digging and digging and digging and digging to get to that, right? Now, and that's where all your mineral density typically lies, at least for the most part. Now, I mean, you know, stick a spade in the ground, just a small hand shovel, and you're already past it. And that's because we have, you know, for lack of a better term, raped the land for agriculture. And it's not, and that's one thing that is, it's a catch-22 with veganism, because veganism is supposed to be all about supporting the earth and the animals and whatnot, but monocrop,
it's terrible.
Monocrop type farming.
You don't see cornfields. You don't see cornfields occurring naturally in nature, right? Yeah.
No, and that's the thing. Cornfields, soybean, all this stuff. It is absolutely. It has destroyed the land. I mean, you can even look at a organic soy field and a non-organic soybean field. They look identical in the off season. It's just a barren wasteland. And then in the on-season, once again, they look identical just about. Typically, the organic fields don't grow quite as rapidly. But, you know, they're right next to each other in most states. And you can't tell the difference in the off-season because it's all nasty-looking dirt. There's no density in there's no mineral density in the soil.
Yeah, I'm a big deer hunter, and my brother and I kind of got really into this. I forget what the type of farming is called, but it's basically where you go away from having like large agricultural plots and you're planting a lot of different types of vegetables and plants on top of each other. And it takes 2 or 3 years, but the people who have done it successfully say, like, when you look at the soil after those couple of years, it's like this dark, like it almost looks like chocolate cake, you know, like it's just, you can just tell that it's way richer in terms of like the nitrogen that's in the soil, and they're like the deer grow bigger, they're much healthier. So it's really interesting how agriculture kind of changes the whole soil base.
Yeah, well, that's regenerative ag. That's what you're talking about. It's regenerative ag, and that's it's actually what we do on our farm. It's, you know, we have enough pastures to move the cattle month to month. You know, let them graze and then stomp poop and everything else into the soil, and it just builds and builds and builds. You can build. I want to say it's up to 2 inches or so per year with regenerative ag of soil. I think that's what it is. There's a really great book that I absolutely love called Sacred Cow, and it goes through all that. And once again, it's not dogmatic. It's not just, demeaning or beating down vegans, but it does go through the differences and the actual scientific basis for having regenerative ag, which is carbon neutral, typically at worst, and carbon negative at best. And when you compare that to, monocrop and the processing of things like Beyond Meat, it is way far worse for the environment. I mean, we're looking at, there's no way they can make most vegan foods carbon even neutral.
Yeah.
So, that's my issue predominantly with the vegan diet, but then also the nutrient density is just not there.
Yeah. So, yeah, that makes sense. Plus the other thing too is just like the amount of insects and shit that get killed in monocropping, right? Like if you're, or rabbits or whatever. So like let's shift gears just a little bit here. If you're looking at somebody who's like just strictly trying to lose weight, and I know typically you're dealing with people with like autoimmune stuff, but let's just say I can't lose weight, right? I can lose weight. How important would you say is what you eat versus like exercising and cardio versus and all that? Yeah,
this is one of my favorite topics. So I absolutely hate the, it's 80% food, 20% exercise, all that kind of stuff. Number one, I'm not good at math. And number two, I absolutely hate any kind of preferential treatment with any of that stuff. You have to be 100% dedicated, period, right? You're not going to outwork a bad diet. I don't care how hard and fast you work out, the Twinkies are going to run harder and faster. Things like that, you can't just base it on a percentage breakdown. So diet approach, or I term it lifestyle. I rarely use diet in my practice.
Yeah.
And for that reason, because it has the word die in it. And people just have a negative association with it. So I like at least 2 to 3 days of exercise a week, resistance training. I don't have most of my clients do any cardiovascular activity until they can at least give me 2 to 3 days a week of exercise training or resistance training. And then I make sure.
What do you mean by resistance training? Just light weights?
Yeah, so weight or plyometrics, body weight exercises, things like that. Typically, like I love yoga too, but I prefer Pilates because Pilates are a little bit more, resistance driven. But I have clients to do both or one or the other. I try to get, for women, I like a minimum of 2 to 3 days a week at 45 minutes per workout of resistance training, because that's like the baseline for maintaining / slightly gaining muscle. And for men, it's 3 to 4 days a week of resistance training, about 45 minutes or so. And if they're going to do cardio, I always have them wait till after the workout, because you don't want to pre-exhaust too much. Guys like me that have competed before and done more of the bodybuilding stuff, you can start with the cardio and I'll get warm and all that kind of stuff, because you're going to be in the gym for 2 hours anyway in most cases. I don't, but a lot of guys do. And you can get around some of that, the benefit loss ratio with energy and all this other stuff. But with most of my clients, I try to get them in there for what they need, and that's resistance, because they need muscle. Muscle loss, or it's termed sarcopenia, is the #1 predictor of mortality over the age of 70. And you probably know somebody that's fallen, a grandparent or a great grandparent or someone that's fallen, they get a broken hip and then they die of pneumonia. That's typically what happens. And it's because of lack of muscle control, motor control, lack of balance. So I try to get all my folks exercising and eating better, and that's one reason why I love a carnivore-based approach, or at least a meat-based approach, because it's affordable. You can find the food anywhere. Everybody pretty much knows how to cook it, and it's going to be protein dense. So you're going to build muscle. The most lacking nutrient in the U.S. is actually not protein, oddly enough, but quality wise, it is. Like, you know, we get the standard American diet, you get a whole lot of everything, but with quality protein to build muscle, in the absence of things like excess carbohydrates, typically what we end up seeing is people just don't eat much of anything instead of replacing it with protein to get another energy substrate. If I can have people eat a more carnivore-based diet, they're going to get a ton of nutritious fat and a ton of good quality protein. So, and fat and protein exist together in nature. So they are going to get the optimal amount of nutrients as well, not to just macronutrients, but micronutrients. And they're going to have a higher satiety. So they're not going to be as hungry. They're going to build more muscle. They're going to burn more fat. They're going to not be chronically fatigued or anything else, because getting that fat in place of those carbohydrates is, you know, they're shifting fuel sources. So they're going to burn it more for energy. And they're going to feel better longer. You know, they're not going to dip at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and have to go for a pot of coffee. They're not going to need a Twinkie from the break room. You know, if you can get them fat adapted to where their body's burning energy the way it was when they came out of their, you know, mom, which was fat adaptation. You are born into the world as a fat adapted organism. We just slowly get away from that through childhood, and we just become carbohydrate dependent. So if that I tend to get off on tangents, but yeah, so that's kind of, my outlook on that.
Yeah. So what are you like, how do I say this? If you think about different types of like working out, right? Like when I was in high school, played football, we did a lot of like Olympic lifts, right? So power cleans and squats, snatches. I feel like as I've gotten older, I do like more HIIT workouts. There's Tabata that's big. I got into running for a while. Like, is there a type of exercise you think is kind of better? Like, what do you kind of recommend? Like heavy weights? Is it, you know, cardio based, like high intensity workouts? Is it straight like running or doing sprints? Kind of, what do you recommend?
Number one, I like whatever you'll do. So that's with most of my clients. My demographic is typically between the ages. It's typically women between the ages of 45 and 65. So I'm like, just tell me what you'll do, and I'll start there. Right? Got to meet them where they're at. Now, if they're more willing, then I am all for high intensity interval training. Is obviously one of my favorite things. I really like just any kind of resistance training. I like periodized training, and what that is in simple terms is, you know, I'm sure you're familiar, or at least somewhat familiar with progressive overload, or the definition of, you know, you want to progress each workout, right? Well, with periodized training, you're constantly progressing, but you're also going through different periods of certain types of resistance training. So one period might be more neurologically stimulating, heavier movements, lower rep ranges, less volume, more intensity, right? You do that for a few weeks, and then you switch gears to the second part of your workout, which is a more high intense, more high volume, right? So more of a HIIT workout for a few weeks. So you cycle those. So that's a periodized training split. So you're trying to progress, go up in weights, for instance, on more of the high intensity, lower volume workouts. Then you carry those new max lifts into that high volume phase. So you're constantly stacking work, but you're varying it enough to where the body does not get used to it, and you continue to improve performance. So if I can get somebody to do that, I don't really care what they're actually training for, whether it be, I've got a distance runner right now that's clocking some of his best times, actually his best times, and winning contests. And I told him the same thing I'll tell you, like I'm not a runner. I used to run when I was in middle school, but outside of that, I've never been a distance runner or anything else. I haven't studied deep into the science of running, but a couple of things were clear to me when we started working together about a year ago. He needed more muscle mass, he needed to lose fat, and he needed to become fat adapted to where his body would burn fat as a preferred fuel source. He went on to gain about 10 pounds of muscle in a year, which is absolutely ridiculous. I believe he's 34, and lost about 13 pounds of fat, and won the first two contests that he entered last year, you know, and he had never done that before. And, you know, the first 6 months were hell. It sucked not getting his pasta and whatnot, his beer after a race. But
Yeah.
by the time we got to the, end of last year, he was clocking his best times. He'd won multiple contests. He was up 10 or so pounds of muscle, and he was lean and, feeling amazing, so I'm okay with people running, sprinting, doing all this other stuff, but I don't train them necessarily for a specific, what's the word, hobby or sport. I associate it more with how can we make your muscle better, more effective? How can we make it fire faster? How can we, help your metabolism work better? How can we get you more energy? How can we get you a higher rate of protein synthesis? How can we help you recover? I even work on breathing technique and I have many people take their mouth and put a nasal strip on when they sleep, so they get more O2 turnover at night. And I have them do it when they work out too. It makes a big difference there. It kind of hyperoxygenates the body, and you get more nitric oxide production, so more blood flow. And like, if you're a runner, you're a sprinter, you need that.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you to, to get more hamstring explosiveness to do one of the Fred Hatfielder, he's known as Dr. Squat. One of his claims to fame, which was jumping off of a ladder onto a deadlift platform and then pulling the weight, because it triggers a higher rate of motor unit recruitment. Most people aren't going to do that, but I can get people to switch their food a little bit, or I can get people to put a nasal strip on, so that tends to work. So I'll do whatever modality they want, but typically the two things that remain the same is fat adaptation, or, improving energy balance, and then exercise resistance training.
Yeah. How are we doing on time here? We looking good, or we got time for one more?
We got about 5 or 10 minutes. So if you want to go through one or two more things.
So let me ask you this, sticking on this topic, what are your thoughts on like supplements, especially like pre-workout supplements? And then the other thing I think would be interesting to talk about, especially for men, is testosterone and how that kind of reduces as you age, ways to maybe combat that. Yeah. What are your thoughts on guys who are actually taking testosterone?
Yeah, so starting with the supplements, obviously, a shameless plug. I work for the largest nutritional company on the eastern seaboard. We're east of the Mississippi. It's Nutrition World in Chattanooga, and we're privately owned. We've been around since 1979. And Ed Jones, our founder, who has a great podcast that I wanted to mention to you, is the Holistic Navigator. His stuff is great. It goes into a lot of the stuff I've talked about. But we have a ton of great nutrients for an athlete or just an average Joe that wants to work out. Like what I'm drinking right now is electrolytes, a very, very mild stimulant. I guess you'd call it a pre-workout. It's just like maybe 30 grams of caffeine, 30 milligrams of caffeine, not much. And some nitric oxide boosting ingredients like arginine, nothing fancy, because the simple stuff tends to work the best. So my favorite thing for a workout for most people is coffee. But if you're going to do something, I like something gentle on the system like this, or mushrooms, like cordyceps that help to increase oxygen flow, beetroot extract, arginine, citrulline, things that increase nitric oxide production. But my biggest thing for most folks, especially athletes, to help improve their performance is intra-workout nutrition, or it's known as peri-workout nutrition. And that's when I'll add in a ton of amino acids, like your branched chain aminos, your essential amino acids, the aminos your body can't produce on its own, and things like
the BCAAs are big for like guys who are working out doing intermittent fasting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I intermittent fast, and I've been told by people that I should start taking branched chain amino acids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing with that. You want to make sure, now your body, you can typically fast for 3 to 4 days before you'll start sacrificing muscle mass. But I'm still a big fan of getting amino acids in. I typically recommend bone broth a little bit more, just because you get the collagen that helps to heal the gut as well while you're doing it, which is like glycine, because it's not one of the branched chains, but it's extremely important in healing the gut wall. And but BCAAs in general are fantastic. I mean, there's really good research on cancer patients even. I mean, you have people supplementing with 10 to 20 grams of branched chain amino acids a day, which most of your companies are going to have about 5 to 10 grams in a serving. Cancer patients would take that and notice a 30%, I believe it was 30% reduction in muscle loss over a 6-month period, which is huge. That's what kills most cancer patients is actually the treatment, eventually wears them out because they can't eat, they can't sleep, they can't recover. So branched chain amino acids are so important to help with that because they don't require much metabolism at all like protein does. They just absorb, break down very quickly, and stimulate protein synthesis. But yeah, the intra workout stuff is my favorite. That's my favorite time to get the nutrients in because if you're thirsty, you're going to drink it. What's worse than drinking plain water? Nobody likes that. So we try to get the electrolytes in them. I absolutely love creatine.
And you're saying intra workout is in during the middle of the workout.
Right. Because you're like a dry sponge falling into a, tub full of water, right? You're going to suck up so many more nutrients. But my foundational supplements, I'll go through those real quick, are a good quality whey protein or egg or beef-based protein because they do metabolize, absorb, promote protein synthesis better than plant-based. And that's not, once again, a stab at plant-based. It's just that's the fact. There's actually just a huge meta-analysis that came out a couple of years ago on that, and the results speak for themselves. So that's my main thing. Creatine is also part of my foundational nutrient profile. It does not shut down your kidneys. It will not kill your kids. If you have any soccer moms watching, it is not the worst thing ever, but it is probably the most anabolic over-the-counter nutrient, meaning muscle growth promoting. Right. So I absolutely love creatine. And then the third thing would be electrolytes, amino acids. So you combine those three things, you're going to be set. And then just to touch on it briefly with the testosterone, I definitely see it decreasing guys my age. I just turned 30 last year. I've actually myself had chronically low testosterone since I was 23, and I may have even had it before that. That's when I first got it tested. $6,000 in blood work just to realize that I just had terrible testosterone production. And I spent the next 7 years up until literally January this year trying every modality you can think of to improve testosterone production. And a few work better than others, things like time restricted eating, intermittent fasting, things like the ketogenic diet work really good, or just a low carb, higher protein and fat diet. Moving to more animal-based, saturated fat, dense dieting work really well because animal-based fats in general tend to boost testosterone anyway. So doing all that work, changing my workouts worked really well, but none of it was enough to get over the maybe 100 points over what would be considered deficient, right? So, when it comes to the second part of your question, which is, how do you feel about testosterone supplementation or people that use that? I actually just started testosterone supplementation literally a day ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I told myself when I was 23, when I first started trying all these other modalities, that if I could not get it above baseline by the time I hit 30, I was like, I'm just going to go ahead and go on supplementation because I did all my competing natural and everything else, and of course got my ass kicked. But at least I can say that I competed natural and I tried and I pushed the limit as far as I could, and actually over the last couple of years got the best shape of my life. But you get to a point to where your body is it's not going to progress any further with some of this stuff. And I see that with a lot of folks that actually do this stuff the right way, that, try to exhaust their natural production as much as possible. And then once they hit a wall, then it's time to, get with a professional that can help guide you through it. It's not going to just, screw your numbers up and everything else, which I have seen happen, and help just promote optimal longevity. Because I am a huge fan of testosterone supplementation, whether it be natural or replacement therapy. I think most men need to be on it because, quite frankly, by the time we hit, and women too, by the time we hit 40, Mother Nature's pretty much done with us, man. Like it's downhill from there. So if you can promote that longevity, obviously through uses of nutraceuticals, there's a lot of stuff there that you can use, but also optimizing those hormones. I mean, it makes a huge difference. And ask any man or woman that's gone on it that's been treated well anyway. They're going to tell you the same thing. And there's so much less risk than what is kind of promoted to it. if it's done correctly, that I think most people, if they can't optimize their numbers and everything, and I've held this belief since I was in my early 20s. If they can't get it done the right, like the natural way, well then do it the other way. But just don't, you also have to be careful here and not be the type of person that's like, oh yeah, man, it's just all hard work. It's all dedication. It's all like, you start going on supplementation with this kind of stuff. Like, it does make things easier. It does, the gains come easier. The food can be a little looser and stuff like that. But if you're already a dedicated individual, that's getting the food right, that's doing getting your recovery in good, that's doing everything else, this is just another modality to further improve your performance. And it levels the playing field for a lot of folks. It's one reason why I'm not a fan of supplementation or of drug testing and all that crap in sports. I mean, everybody's using it. They have a lot more money than most folks do to hide it.
Right.
So it's kind of like the NIL deals and stuff now. If you're going to do that, you might as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, man, look, I know we're running out of time. This has been a super interesting conversation for me and really enlightening. I appreciate you coming on. You said Nutrition World in Chattanooga?
Yeah, Nutrition World of Chattanooga. If anyone wants to check us out, we're nutritionw.com, and we do Zoom consultations as well. So if you need to get, if you want more information about any of this stuff, just jump on there and click the consultation button, and we can get in touch with you.
Awesome. Well, man, I appreciate you coming on again, and thanks so much for giving me some time on Sunday.
Yeah, dude. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I love it. Hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, buddy.